there is not one voice to find the good way out of our current situation, where we all say, rightly say, in comparison to other countries, electricity is relatively expensive in Germany. If they put their focus on nuclear power, why shouldn't we also, in a very few days, weeks per year, where we need to rely on other sources than short-term BESS or renewable production, since there is no wind or sun at potential days, why shouldn't we cooperate more closely with France or with Scandinavia or with other countries?
Well, not all investments are sustainable, even if they claim to be green, right? You have to be really careful.
Hi, we are Tim van den Brande, Chief Growth Officer of the AREAM Group, and my name is Patrick Lemke-Braselmann. I'm the co-CEO of AREAM, and today we host our 20-year anniversary Jubileums podcast. Today we would like to introduce AREAM a little bit to all our listeners today, and I would like to start with a few questions, Tim, if it's fine for you.
Yeah, let's do that. So, Patrick, what is the biggest challenge, our environment is facing these days?
From my point of view, for our industry, the most challenging aspect is that there is no simple solution for the question that everybody has, or for the wish that everybody has, which implies we want to have cheap, reliable energy. That's the overarching goal for the industry, for the private households. We want to have cheap energy, which is reliable and always available, without blackouts, without short stops or whatever. We don't want to have any compromise to the quality of what we have. But for the end consumer, it's a very simple product because it just comes out of the plug. Nobody really thinks about it. And how does it actually is there? It's not because we as producers decide we produce now. The system works in a way that energy must be there when it is demanded, either by private households or by the industry. And now we have very many different stakeholders in our game here. It's not only us, renewables, it's gas, it's oil, it's grid, it's BESS, it's politics. So it's very complicated. It's very local. It starts with your solar PV on the balcony. It is regional, it is national, and it's also international. So Germany is linked also to the grid of France, of Poland, of Scandinavia, of Czech Republic. So all the neighboring countries have also grids with Germany. So there is not one voice to find the good way out of our current situation, where we all say, rightly say, in comparison to other countries, electricity is relatively expensive in Germany. And also the politicians want to achieve the goal and want to pave the way to cheaper energy. But who can actually tell them what the best way is? Depending on who they listen to, they will get very different views. If you listen to somebody like us, coming more from the renewable side, with commercial background, but nonetheless more on the renewable side, we will definitely have a different view than the guy coming from the gas side or coming from the oil side or being grid operator or whatever. So the actual decision makers in the end have really a difficult task to figure out what is best for the system and what is not necessarily best for one market participant. So what is really missing when I read the newspapers, you very rarely find a holistic view that describes our path to a solution which factors all this complexity into a route that might lead to success in the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever. And at the moment, we have a very, let's say, chaotic view on the system with many different solutions that might work or might not work. But there is not one loud voice that could claim, yes, we are for sure right. And if we look at other markets, for example, one point I really don't understand, that we still have subsidies in the scheme that support a constant demand of energy and do not favor flexibility. So there is an industry support scheme that provides roughly 1.4 billion euros a year to the companies if they take off energy in a certain band. So they cannot react to lower prices, because if they would lose the subsidy in this case.
Absolutely.
And why are we not able to have smart meters in Germany, like in Scandinavia, where 99% of France have smart meters? I think we have less than 5% of our private households have smart meters. So there are so many difficulties in a system that was based on a centralized system with, let's say, with one energy price on our Kupferplatte here in Germany. And if you want to move away from centralized to decentralized, you always have to change, you also have to change the regulatory framework around it in order to support also the demand to be flexible. So the typical buzzwords that we will need are digitalization, flexibility, nodal system, or at least price zones, in order to enable each individual component to react to kind of market requirements. And this is, let's say, that worries me the most, that there is no simple solution, but there will be very many different steps to be taken, and it includes geopolitical risk now, which wasn't there 10 years ago. So there are many different aspects that need to be factored in, which makes our picture pretty complicated. We, of course, think that we know the right path, which is flexibility, digitalization, renewable energy production, BESS, and all these things that help to create a stable system in the end with relatively low prices. We should definitely cooperate more intensively with other markets, like the French market. If they put their focus on nuclear power, why shouldn't we also, in a very few days, weeks per year, where we need to rely on other sources than short-term BESS or renewable production, since there is no wind or sun at potential days, why shouldn't we cooperate more closely with France or with Scandinavia or with other countries?
Absolutely.
But we always try to be autark, and this is, at least it gives me the impression.
We have to work together. We have to learn how to work together.
Exactly, and if we don't trust our neighbors here in Europe, who should we trust?
Absolutely.
And in the end, last year, I remember there was a big cry out in the press that we had net energy import cost of 3 billion. So we paid more to France and Scandinavia and other countries than they paid to us for electricity. Oil and gas, each year, it's 75 to 80 billion a year. So we worry about 3 billion euros, which go to our direct neighbors we really would like to cooperate with, instead of importing LNG gas from the US or whatever. So this is something that makes it difficult.
You have to look at the big picture. You mentioned energy prices, low energy prices as being good. That's really definitely, one thing I remember. Germany being an industrial state, it needs energy. I think it's critical. It's critical. You also mentioned the fact that there are price zones somewhere. I think in Italy there are price zones, in Scandinavia there are price zones as well. How would that work, and how would that be implemented in Germany? First
of all, there's even more. If we go to the US, they have a nodal system, I guess now since 18 years or even 20 years. So each individual substation has its individual price. So
this means that somebody in North Los Angeles would have a different price than South Los Angeles?
If it's a different substation, yes, could be. And why would it be helpful to have price zones also in Germany? I mean, we have a lot of wind production, for example, in the north, and we have a lot of solar also in the northeast. And there are definitely times where the wind is regulated or solar is regulated because there's less demand than production. But nonetheless, there is consumption in the south, which cannot be supported by the production in the north because the grid is not extended enough by now. There definitely needs to be more capex spending on grid, but as long as we have this system, it would and does imply if there's a battery in the south, in this simple scenario, it would consume energy because there are negative priced hours or very low priced hours, so it would consume energy, and since there are no electrons in the system in Bavaria at this point in time, the gas power station would need to start in order to feed the battery, which of course economically does not make sense.
Nonsensical game, basically.
Exactly. And this would be avoided if you had two different price zones. And of course it could work also the other way around. And maybe we should have more than just 2. Maybe it's more 5 or 6, like the European Union like Brussels recommends us to implement. But there are many, let's say, different interests who don't want to have this, because a single price also has advantages when it comes to energy contracts, which a company in the south enters into with, for example, the offshore wind farm, which price will apply. So there are topics that need to be addressed and solved, but it's feasible because it's feasible also in other countries. And if the argument is there is not enough volume in each individual market, I would assume in Italy, in the different markets, there's a lot less volume, and nonetheless it works.
They have a number of systems working together. Okay, thank you.
What makes a green investment truly sustainable in your view?
I think green investments, well, not all investments are sustainable, even if they claim to be green, right? You have to be really careful. But I think a green investment is truly sustainable when you look at the impact of the whole, let's say, investment system, and that means the fund, the assets, the various contracts you have, but even the investment advisor, and you basically check, at every single step of the value chain, how much CO2 is really being, let's say, utilized, depleted, to achieve the right kind of return. And typically for a green investment, the way that AREAM would suggest it, we are not producing any CO2. On the contrary, we are producing enormous amounts of energy that are green, that are sustainable, that do not produce any CO2, so that take away CO2 from the system. Another one for you. Patrick, this is a good one. What was an investment that made you particularly proud, and why?
It was probably relatively at the beginning of my career in the AREAM group. Back then, we had an office building in Frankfurt where SunPower also had a few floors in it. So we had a small office, there are 2 or 3 stories in there. And the guys that we met there came, it was in 2010, beginning of October around, and said, we have a big project in Italy that we are about to sell. There are 2 buyers who are really in, and the process is already ongoing, but the 3rd buyer dropped out. Are you available to step into their role? And we need to achieve the closing before Christmas. Actually, this plant is still one of the biggest in terms of euro output, or let's put it this way, it's a 51 megawatt peak single axis tracking plant in Italy. Back then, around about 280 million investment, which was one of the biggest in Italy. And together with this tariff, of course, it generates a huge amount of revenue every year, since the tariff is still relatively high. It's the old feed-in tariff, with in the range of 30 cents per kilowatt hour, plus the market price. And in the end, we were able, with our funds, to acquire this asset in 10 weeks. It was very intense, but it was a great project. We still hold those. We still hold this investment, still performing very well. So absolutely. Yep. It's not necessarily managed by us. Later on, this project was sold to, the other share was sold to ERG. So they are in the lead for this project now. But back then, it was a fantastic project. And what we also did, we organized the sale actually to ERG for the other investors, which was a very successful one. The IRR was double digit, and irrespective of the retroactive active cuts that also applied in the Italian market. So, but mainly this acquisition process in 10 weeks, this was a pretty exciting time.
And it's still one of the biggest investments of AREAM?
Yeah, it's one of the bigger ones, yes.
Good story.
How does AREAM manage to identify new market opportunities at an early stage? I'm not sure if this is really your flaw, but maybe you have a view.
AREAM has access to all of the subsectors of the energy value chain, from development all the way to PPAs, selling the energy at a good price. I think that through our both development arm, but also the PPA arm, we have access to innovative market opportunities. For example, on the development side, we are one of the first players in Germany to do BESS. And we are really looking at the best way to develop BESS. Is it inside? Is it outside of the system? Is it, what we call gray or green? Those are, let's say, elements, we are first movers. And indeed, in our new funds, these are things where we will show, let's say, first mover advantage to our investors as well. On the PPA side, we are seeing and we are participating at our own, let's say, kind of level to the evolution of how electricity is being sold in the market. You mentioned earlier, there's a one pricing zone element like that, which has a disadvantage to producers like us. It would be better, let's say, to have various pricing zones. What we can do to achieve that is effectively go through every single, let's say, country lane of Germany and discover and speak to the German Mittelstand and discuss various strategies with these people, with these companies, on how to best cover their energy requirements. And that can be either by, let's say, developing their own asset pool, where we have done some in the past, or it could be by, just kind of acquiring energy from our own pool of renewables resources.
Yeah, Tim, and what I would like to add to this point is actually when you look at our history, we started with solar, then onshore wind, then BESS, then we started cooperations with utilities here in Germany on the development side and also on the ownership side in the end. Look at the heat topic, look at the SAF topic. So we are constantly broadening step by step our, let's say, activities within the energy transition field. And this is probably something where, at least within Germany, after being in this market for 20 years, at least many people also think of us when they look at, let's say, partners or investor corporations. So I underline and add this to your points.
Excellent. I fully agree. I'm happy you agree. How is the perception of green investments currently changing among institutional investors?
Yeah, from my point of view, that's a topic we briefly touched upon before. There's no willingness to sacrifice yield for green investments anymore, which might have been the case like 10 years, 15 years ago. ESG, or maybe even 5 years ago, ESG was a very important topic when it was still a niche market. Now that it has become really a mainstream market where we talk about multi-billions that need to be invested every year in order to support the energy transition, not only in Germany, but in Europe, in the world. As we know, in China, they are the biggest investor into renewables. If you look at California and other markets which are really strong, it only works when the field is attractive for institutional investors. Otherwise, you will not achieve to attract so much money that is actually needed for the next 10, 15, 20 years, both on production side as well as on grid and all other things that are needed, or substations. So the green investor from the past is not the green investor of today anymore. ESG, especially in Europe, still plays an important role, both for companies as well as for example, EIBs or banks, but it definitely needs to be underlined by strong and reliable returns. Otherwise, you won't find the money that you actually need.
So you're saying, and I think I agree with you, that we've come, let's say, from a market that was heavily subsidized in the initial, let's say, 20, 25 years of its existence, into a market that is actually right now very market-oriented, i.e., it's all about opportunities, risks, and returns.
Yes, in a way. Maybe I would phrase it a little bit differently. The subsidies allowed you to generate great returns in the past, depending a little bit on the time when you actually invested, but in most markets which have not touched the subsidies retroactively, so the scheme stayed in place, these projects were typically very successful ones. Many investors shied away and said, as long as we are in subsidized environment, it's not my right place because I want to be in a market environment. Subsidies led to the fact that also, let's say, mom and pop shops could do relatively large project developments, investment, managing the assets, because relatively little know-how was needed. As long as you grid connected a well-built plants with a nice tariff, you didn't need much, let's say, know-how within your company. Today, this is completely different. You need to know what to do with the energy. You need to know how do I finance a project if I don't have a feed-in tariff scheme that allows me to get a leverage of 80%. If we go to markets outside of Germany, try to find a leverage of 70% for a Spanish solar plant. That's pretty difficult, if not, let's say, impossible. So you need to have a wider skill set in order to play a relevant role in this market. And this, from my point of view, really led to a professionalization of our industry over the last 10 years, which helps us to be attractive for institutional investors, because it is a professional environment where money should be placed. How do you manage to remain both sound and visionary as an investment company?
So sound and visionary. I think we achieved that. And the main building block for us to achieve that is culture. We have this open culture, we're happy to take risks, we're happy to try new things. And that's being supported by the whole, let's say, of AREAM. It's not only us, it's also the shareholder, Marcus, and the whole culture that, you guys have developed in the firm that, in my mind, really managed to achieve that. And that is something that is very easy to value, but I think it's a central block of the value that we can generate.
It may be important to add the risk that we take is typically not, or it's not on the fund side, but it's on the AREAM side. When asset comes to the fund, it's de-risked as far as it can be in this environment. So I think that's probably one of the important points. On the one hand, we are very sound when something enters into the institutional hemisphere, so in a fund. But as long as we are in an environment where we do create something new, it's not fund related, but it happens within the AREAM world.
No, and we have our own balance sheet, as you mentioned, actually, which is strong, and that allows us, with support of everybody, to develop new ideas. And that's, I think, what makes us sound and visionary.
I agree.
We're getting there. Oh, Patrick, this is a good one. What advice would you give to someone who wants to start a career in clean energy markets? Beyond come to AREAM.
No. The market is far bigger than AREAM, which is great. Actually, the question I always address, especially to young people, is first of all, I hope they still do, but let's assume they read a newspaper or a magazine. Do they have the interest to, on a Sunday you're on a couch, Sunday morning, you open the newspaper, the Handelsblatt, the Spiegel, the FAZ, whatever, or an international newspaper, and the topic is energy. Does your eye stop for a second and you at least have the tendency to read it? Or do you switch to sport or something else, or you like stock markets or whatever, or real estate? This is one of the first great tests, because if you are bored by this article, you shouldn't enter into our business. If you like it, you should definitely consider, no matter in which field, it might be marketing, might be financials, might be human resource, whatever, come to this industry which offers so much growth over the coming decades, and you will always find your place in our environment. I tell the story always to especially young people, because I had a similar experience in my life. I worked for quite some time in the real estate market, and I would like to read these articles on a Sunday. So that was definitely not my way to go. But I was so fixed up or so motivated by everything that came around in the context of energy, because nobody knows how this market will look like in 5 years. RWE doesn't know it. Orsted doesn't know it. Nobody knows it. And this kind of uncertainty creates so much room for agile companies to play a role. This is why I think no matter on which side you are, if you're a risk taker and you want to, let's say, start up, if you want to go to an established firm or whatever, there's a market for everybody in an environment, in an industry that will make our world a better place. So this is why I would say everybody who likes this theme should definitely think about our industry.
So you're saying there's a very strong element of purpose. People should want to be in the industry because they are passionate about it. They feel it will complete them. And then once you've achieved that, once let's say you've determined this is your purpose, there's also a very strong element of, invest yourself, understand the industry, immerse yourself in it, and try to be one of the people who knows this industry at the highest level.
Yeah. I would support this purpose, but I would definitely also support electricity, energy as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Even if purpose is not your main driver, it is a very interesting market nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, you serve a great purpose because renewables really, I really believe so, make our, let's say, world a better place in the end. But even if this is not your main focus, you have many other aspects that also underline our story, our big story in the end. If it's geopolitical independence on the energy field, if it is the finance side or whatever, it's great if you can, let's say, or if you have this purpose. But even without this, our industry is a great place to be in it. Of course, I would like to have as many with purpose as possible, but even those who are not driven by this can find a nice place.
And as you said, the ramifications of our industry are massive. They will have an impact on Germany, on, let's say, our industries, our families, the world. That's great.
And our industry will constantly develop. My favorite example is when I joined this industry in 2009, a watt peak module price was around €2.40. Today it's around 10 cents. Nobody knows where the best prices will be in 5, 7 or 10 years. Nobody will know or does know at the moment what kind of technological edge we will have in 5 or 7 or 10 years. So it's an area where you will never be bored. Let's put it this way.
No, I mean, I remember a gentleman called Michael Liebreich who maybe 10 years ago said that energy prices would naturally go down to zero. Is that going to happen today with BESS and the whole transformation of the system? It's a big question mark. I don't agree with him anymore. What is your view?
I definitely don't believe so, because the electricity demand will increase tremendously over the next 10, 15, 20 years if there's no technological super development that computers don't need energy anymore alone because of all these data centers and so on and so forth, and our, let's say, AI world. It will lead to the fact that energy will be needed all over the continent. Fast demands, low demand, everything. So my big belief is that the demand will make sure that energy is not electricity is not produced for free in the end.
Exactly.
And cheap prices always generate their markets. The only thing we have to make sure, and then we come back to one of the other questions, that the whole system costs remain attractive. Because it doesn't help us if we have energy production costs of 1 cent or 2 cents, and if we have to pay 10-cent grid costs, 2 cents subsidies for gas reserve fire plants or whatever, the whole system cost must be reduced in the coming years. And that's probably one of the major challenges
so focus
we face.
on system costs and challenging to keep those low.
How does the collaboration between sales, investment, and operations work at your company at AREAM?
Yep, definitely we can go through that. It's an important topic because this is really, let's say, the blood, the life of the company. Kind of creating new products, go outside, and raise money with them. So I would say at the very beginning, there's always a collaboration between sales and investments. Typically at the leadership level, where we develop a new product together. How does it work? On the one side, let's say, the investment team will say, okay, in the current market, these are the best opportunities. This is what, we would, let's say, kind of put the money at play in. And these are the kind of structures we're looking at. So we're discussing strategy on the one side. And then there's a discussion with the sales leadership to see, okay, does that fit into the investors' requirements? And then we basically together will, let's say, kind of work on a product that refines the initial, let's say, proposition and builds a strategy, let's say, coming from the two angles that works on the markets on the one side and the sales side for the investors on the other side. That's the most important element determining the strategy. Then typically there will be an element of, let's say, building a financial model and making sure that financial model, let's say, returns again, what was initially expected in the business plan. And then there's an element of documentation as well, making sure that we have the right financial documents to be able to raise money, as well as, let's say, establishing a presentation that shows to investors what we are achieving with this specific strategy. And that's also a collaboration between the two. On the back of that, the investment team will start to work more on building up a pipeline and specific market relevant opportunities that would be basically coming into the portfolio. And the investment team on the other side will start, the sales team will start, let's say, kind of looking at a short list of investors, or let's say a longer list of investors that would typically be invested in a structure like that. The sales team goes out, say to 300, 400 investors globally with the sales idea. And of course, some will say, I don't have any capital available right now, but I like your idea. Thank you very much. Come back in 6 months. Some will say, I don't have any allocation to this specific investment, let's say, kind of strategy, so I can't do that. But some will say, yes. We set up meetings with these people. And then typically it's again a collaboration of both sides. Sales on the one side and the investment team on the other side, presenting AREAM, presenting the investment opportunity, and then guiding the investor through the whole, let's say, due diligence process until they have final approval. And that's really a teamwork. In the meantime, while all this is going on, that will typically last between 3 and 9 months, depending on the investor, we will start discussing this with the operational team as well, our asset management team. Here again, to make sure that processes are put in place between, let's say, the various teams, more specifically investment and asset management team, to manage the future assets coming into the fund. And then once we do what we call the first closing, which is when investors actually have signed the Zeichnungsschein and have accessed the fund, then the investment team can start buying assets from the pipeline. And when these assets come into the fund, they're being managed by the asset management team, who have one of the most important roles at all, which is effectively making sure that these assets are being controlled, are being, let's say, kind of kept at the right operational standards throughout the whole life of the fund, which typically lasts 10 to 15 years. Okay, so basically, guys, thank you for listening. I hope we could generate some interest, into AREAM, but more importantly, into our market, into renewable energies in Europe and in Germany. So great. Thanks for listening. I hope you had a great time. If there's any more kind of, let's say, interest into content, there's other things for you guys to look at, and I hope to see you guys next time.